Hey, Rennie Joe here, and this is 1000 Reviews, the series where I plan on reviewing every album from the 1000 albums to listen to before you die book. And today we are looking at the Go-Betweens' 1988 release, 16 Lovers Lane. Now, the Go-Betweens released 16 Lovers Lane underneath the Beggar's Banquet label, produced by Mark Wallace with art direction from John Wilsteed, nationality Australia, running time of 37 minutes and 2 seconds. I believe this is the first Australian group that I have reviewed so far. Now, the Go-Betweens is a group that never managed to reach the heights of much of their contemporaries at the time, such as Lloyd Cole and the Smiths, sharing a very similar tone and style, I would argue, with their instrumentals and their vocal delivery. Especially with this album, much of it sounding very similar to Lloyd Cole and the Commotion's Rattlesnake, which I have reviewed previously on this channel. Although I would argue that this album is a bit more polished and a bit more enjoyable throughout than that one, even though I did enjoy that one quite a bit. As this one has two lead writers and vocalists, Grant McLennan and Robert Forrester, the latter of which I actually prefer quite a bit over the other, especially since he sings in a more monotone, almost Lou Reed-esque way, sounding very similar to that of Lloyd Cole as well. And I feel like these songs with Robert Forrester I often prefer, more often than not, than the ones with Grant McLennan, as I just feel like they are a lot more fleshed out, and his vocal style complements the instrumentals and the style of the music much more. Another great thing about this album is the texture of it and the amount of sounds that are layered out over top, with the instrumentation sounding very strong and flourishing quite beautifully over many of the tracks here. You got violin, oboe, the Hammond organ, and piano all coming in quite strongly throughout most of these tracks to create a very dynamic and fluid sound, constantly elevating each track higher than if they took away any of these instruments. A good example of this would be the second track, Quiet Heart, where I think the arrangement of the instruments is so strong throughout and really elevates this track so highly on the album, especially with the harmonica solo that comes in about 2/3 into this track, really elevating it further. Lyrically, this album is quite poetic in nature and often doesn't really lend itself to be easily interpreted because of the amount of poetic imagery that is used throughout. A good example of this would be the song Clouds, one that I definitely enjoy. It is one of my favorites on here, but I could not tell you what the lyrics are. They sound great, they're gorgeous lyrics, but trying to specifically decipher them is not as easy as many of their contemporaries. Lyrics such as, "Visions of blue, I'm angry, I'm wise, and you're under cloudy skies." I don't really know what to make of that, but it's gorgeous nonetheless. And this entire song, especially lyrically, is quite well written. Streets of Your Town is arguably the Go-Betweens' biggest hit, the closest thing they ever had to a breakout single, and its overall tone and style definitely feels more commercially developed and feels like it is a bit more made for radio than the rest of the track list here, but nonetheless, it is still a great track regardless, as it fits a very late night sort of summer vibe that feels very specific to a time and atmosphere, while at the same time constantly flourishing and being quite texturally advanced, constantly shifting throughout this track and eventually leading into a guitar solo that really just continues to bring this track one level higher than it could have been. It feels as if it is definitely adding quite a bit to the mix to create a much more thought out, well fleshed out sound. And in my opinion, this entire album feels like all of it really comes together with every bit of its strengths in the final track, Dive for Your Memory. Lyrically, sonically, texturally, all of it feels so united and as if it comes together in such a strong way, especially with the vocal effects being slightly reverbed to create a more dreamy and light and atmospheric approach. And in my opinion, this feels like the best execution of all their ideas presented on this album to this point as the final and last track to really hit you with a lasting impact, not in any way fizzling out at the end like many albums tend to. And speaking of short and breezy and airy tracks, there are quite a few on here that I enjoy for that aspect especially. I'm Alright and The Devil's Eye are both tracks that are much more brief and feel much more light and airy, feeling like very enjoyable lulls in the album, continuing to make this album feel more breathable and enjoyable. With that all being said, this album is pretty fantastic from front to back. I don't think there is many weak tracks on here. The weakest being Was There Anything I Could Do, which I would attribute to the fact that Grant McLennan's vocals, again, don't do it for me as much as Robert Forster's, and I feel like he withholds quite a back in terms of his vocal delivery, his performance feeling much weaker than his bandmate, but even still, much of this album is fantastic from start to finish. So with that all being said, the soft rating came to an 8.4, which I will leave the hard rating at an 8.4 as well. And finally, is this essential? Is it not essential? It's very similar to Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, where I feel like I want to say it's essential because I thoroughly enjoyed it, but at the same time, I don't know if it is absolutely a must listen. Is this something a music fan would not have gotten if they hadn't listened to it? I'm not so sure. But even still, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt this time and say this is E for essential. It is pretty enjoyable at nearly only 40 minutes long. This is a pretty great album. Let's see what the next album we're listening to is. Random number generator 1 to 1001. Generate 450, which will be the album. 450 being Michael Jackson's Off the Wall, another Michael Jackson album. Go ahead and give that a listen, and I'll review that in about 1 week from now. Anyways, that pretty much does it for this video. Please hit like and subscribe to follow along with every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And as always, my name is Randy Joe, and I'm signing off.